So I've been getting a lot of questions about the optimal diet when dealing with SIBO. And the spoiler alert is that there isn't one. And I know that's going to be upsetting. I know you want to be, oh, I have this problem. I want to use the diet that's going to correct that problem. And there's going to be diet religion type people that will tell you, oh yeah, this diet's going to fix it because it fixed it for me. But anybody saying that does not understand bioindividuality, because the reality is there's never going to be a diet that's right for every person, even every person dealing with the same problem, because we all process foods differently, we all react differently to different approaches. So in this video, I'm going to go through the most popular approaches that people use for SIBO. I'm going to help you understand why they can be beneficial, but I'm also going to help you understand circumstances and things that you need to consider where that approach can actually make that person worse. So this is going to take some effort, but the good news is that there is some light at the end of why don't these varmints get out of me tunnel. So if you can figure out the right approach that's right for you and your body, then you can really speed up the recovery. I'm also going to show you some steps that if you can correct some problems, then it also makes it where you can almost pick the approach that just fits what you want to do the most. Okay, so first let's look at this study here on dietary and medical management of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and I'll have links to all these studies in the description below. But this study showed us that, yeah, there really isn't a winner. There's no real winner. Now, they really like some of these approaches a little bit better, and I'll point those out, but it's important that the medical community has shown that there is an approach that really works for everybody. So what we want to look at first is, let's look at this low FODMAP, and FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharides, and polyols. And this is just a group of foods that contain short-chain carbohydrates and sugar alcohols and things that don't really get absorbed very well in the small intestine, but they can be fermented by bacteria in our large intestine. The problem when we're looking at SIBO is that with SIBO, we have an overgrowth here in the small intestine where we really shouldn't have a lot of bacteria. Most of our beneficial bacteria should exist here in the large intestine. So now if we have a lot of bacteria here and we're eating foods that are going to be fermented here in the small intestine, that's going to create a lot more discomfort. So when someone goes on what's called a low FODMAP diet, I'm not going to dig too much into this. We've covered this in other videos, and if you just search low FODMAP diet list, you're going to find a lot of different lists of foods that show you, oh, this food is higher in FODMAPs, and here's a bunch of foods that you could eat just as easily that are low in FODMAPs. And when someone goes on a low FODMAP diet, it really has the ability to improve their symptoms in a big way in most cases, because you're reducing that amount of fermentation taking place in the small intestine. And that fermentation creates gases that create pressure and bloating and discomfort and cramping and all this stuff that goes along with SIBO that really is not that fun. So this is one of the approaches that this diet showed that did a little bit better than some of the other approaches. And this is also the approach that has probably the most amount of scientific literature behind it, showing that it can really show improvement. The thing is, I don't really view this as the solution. It's just an excellent way to reduce the symptoms of what's going on there. And one thing that can dictate how well it's going to do is going to be the level of that overgrowth. How significant is the overgrowth in the small intestine for that person? If it's really significant, then any step, like reducing things that are going to cause them to create more fermentation, can really improve that scenario for that person. Another popular diet approach is to use a low carb diet, and that's viewed as, well, you're feeding all of these bacteria with these carbohydrates and sugars, so if you reduce that, you're not going to feed them, activate them, create as much gases and pressure and all those things, and you're going to reduce the ability for them to thrive where they really shouldn't be. The problem is when you're reducing carbohydrates, that means you need to increase other things, right? It means you're going to have to increase some proteins and some fats, and some people might not have enough HCl production in their stomach to process proteins correctly. They might not have their bile flowing well enough to process dietary fat. So now a person is going to increase their protein and their dietary fat, but if they don't have the ability to digest those foods correctly, that's going to create a lot more symptoms for them. It could also create a lot more trouble because now you have all this food that really isn't broken down correctly. And one thing to think about is that most people that are dealing with SIBO have SIBO because they're dealing with a low stomach acid issue. They're not creating enough hydrochloric acid in the stomach, because that hydrochloric acid is supposed to kill all the bad guys when they come in on the food that we're eating. The other thing that it does is it triggers some hormones that can trigger this ileocecal valve to open up so that food moves through into the large intestine. But when there's not enough stomach acid, it makes other hormones go high that can leave this open all the time. So now you got the front door open, bad guys coming in, but you also have this back door open, and now the bacteria that's supposed to be in the large intestine moves back into the small intestine and sets up camp there, and now we have that SIBO issue again. So it's very common to see low stomach acid with people that are dealing with SIBO. So when we're talking about any of these dietary approaches, most people are going to need to take other steps beyond just the diet. They're first of all going to need to take steps to reduce this overgrowth, and whether they're doing that with a doctor or using some type of antimicrobials. I'll point you to our video on how to wipe out SIBO fast at the end of this video, and we'll put the link in the description below. I'm not going to dig really into that here, but just know that most people need to take steps to reduce the overgrowth, but they also need to fix any digestive malfunctions that are going wrong, or they're just leaving the front and the back door open. We're going to talk about some other problems that these digestive malfunctions can cause here in just a second. But low carb is an approach that I like a lot. The problem is if someone has low mineral levels in the system and they drop carbohydrates too low, when sugars and minerals both go really low at the same time, it has the ability to create a lot of cravings or depression or mood swings and fatigue and all these other problems. So a person's trying to fix this overgrowth issue, but they're creating a lot of other symptoms. So if you could look at your blood pressure just resting, like at least 2 hours after a meal, if that top number, or the systolic number, is lower than 112, that's a sign that these mineral levels may be going too low. So you might need to take some steps to lift those minerals before you qualify to do a low carb diet. You might need to use more of what we call a medium carb diet, where maybe you're using some foods that contain a little bit more carbohydrates, but maybe you could also look for lower FODMAP foods with a little bit higher carbohydrates. Now you're giving your body a little bit more fuel that's easier to use until you can take steps to lift these mineral levels. Another diet that's very popular is a carnivore diet, and we'll look at this study here on a zero carbohydrate carnivore diet. Can normalize hydrogen positive small intestinal bacterial overgrowth lactulose breath test. And this study was very impressive with the results that people saw in the study, but there was only 6 people in the study. So the thought behind this process is that, well, if someone has like a leaky gut issue going on and all of these plant fibers are creating a lot of inflammation and symptoms for the person, we can go on a carnivore diet and we can remove all those plant fibers. We're also removing all the carbohydrates that could be feeding that bacteria, and that's going to really speed up the process of the body able to heal the situation up. So I'm a fan of a carnivore diet. I like to use it with some clients when the situation is right for a temporary basis. I don't like to use it long term because as beneficial as it can be for some people, it also has the ability to create some imbalances down the road. I'm not going to get into all of that here, but just know that I like the carnivore diet. The problem with that is we want to think again for we're looking at food replacement. If we're reducing all these vegetables and all these carbohydrates, we're really increasing fats and proteins if we're just eating these carnivore type foods. So again, if somebody doesn't have the ability to process proteins or fats correctly, that's going to create a lot of trouble for them. We don't know in this study, did everybody in the study have their HCl working correctly? Maybe SIBO got in when things went down with a specific cold or something like that, some type of stress that reduced the body from making hydrochloric acid during that time, but then they recovered, but now they have this overgrowth in there. We don't know what we're looking at when we're looking at these studies in a lot of cases, so we need to understand that if I do what this study says works, but it didn't work for me, that doesn't mean I'm broken. That means we need to look further into the situation and look at what's going on with your body. In a similar situation when we're looking at fasting, one thing that we want to think about with these very low carb, zero carb, or fasting type situations is that a lot of people dealing with a bacterial overgrowth have the environment kind of set up for some type of yeast or fungal situation to come in. And they're taking steps to reduce all these carbohydrates or sugars that could be feeding the bacteria, but that's going to push a lot of people into ketosis. And if someone has a yeast or fungal situation, well, these types of microorganisms have the ability to feed off of ketones. So now you're allowing them to thrive and creating a problem for a totally different reason. So we really want to look at the scenario that's going on. Now, when we're looking at fasting, people say this has the ability to improve a lot of things when you're looking at your MMC function, or migrating motor complex. And this is a system in the digestive tract that kind of kicks into gear in between meals. And it's meant to kind of clean out undigested food debris, but also clear out bacteria in that small intestine like we were looking at. So if someone's eating all day long, that MMC never gets kicked in and it doesn't clear out all this bacteria. And a lot of people will tell you, well, that's why you have SIBO in the first place, is because you have this MMC not working correctly. Your MMC is broken. And the reality is that this process is kicked into gear by a lot of hormones that are triggered by stomach acid. So if someone doesn't have enough stomach acid, that MMC is not going to work correctly. So I'm not going to dig all the way into that, but we'll have a link in the description below for our video on why your MMC is not working anymore, and you can dig into that a little bit more if you want to. But that's the idea of one of the things that can really benefit with the fasting. But the problem is a lot of people that are not digesting correctly have low levels of minerals, but other resources as well. And when the body doesn't have the resources it needs to function correctly, it's going to elevate stress hormones in the body so that the body can try to function. But those stress hormones going high have the ability to thicken up this bile so it won't flow correctly. So I don't want to take somebody with low resources and then put them, hey, let's just have no food at all. Let's bring in no more resources. That's not going to work really well for them. Now, if a person fixes those digestive malfunctions and they have the ability to lift the resources in the body and they're eating in a way that allows them to thrive from that fasting, then doing some intermittent fasting, maybe skipping breakfast, maybe even further down the day, has the ability to really improve that MMC function a little bit and give them the benefits of that fasting. But just don't view fasting like it's right for everybody. It's really, really not. The other diet that this study really liked was the elemental diet, which is basically removing all of the food and just having liquid nutrients. And this can be beneficial for someone to do just for like 2 weeks maximum. And you really want somebody helping you do this. You want to make sure that your body's getting all the nutrients that it needs. But the studies show that people have the ability to improve these SIBO issues when they're taking those steps. But I view this as a step to take when everything else doesn't work. I don't view that as the first thing to go to just because of the extreme situation with it. A lot of people will say you need to avoid prebiotics just because they have the ability to feed those bacteria, and especially in the small intestine, that's going to really magnify trouble. And we'll come back to that one in a second. The timing of meals can be important just because you do want that space in between meals to allow that MMC action to work. And usually just 3 or 4 hours is enough. And then overnight, if a person is getting like 10 to 12 hours, they're eating at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then they don't eat again until 7 or 8 in the morning. That's a good 10 or 12 hours that will allow that MMC function to work correctly if a person has enough stomach acid to trigger everything into action. So if you're not sure if you have enough stomach acid or not, we'll have a link below for our video on 10 signs of low stomach acid, but you really have to fix that. And the good news is that you can supplement with like betaine HCl capsules in order to acidify the stomach if the stomach is not acidifying itself. So if a person can take steps to fix these digestive malfunctions, now that's going to speed up the process. You're closing the door, the front door and the back door, so you're not bringing in more bad guys as you're wiping out the ones that are in there. And if you can break your food down better, a person might be able to increase their mineral levels if they're really low and allow them to lower their carbohydrates more to be a little bit more effective. We're not going to talk about how to fix digestive malfunctions in this video, but if you're new to this channel, chapters 3 and 4 of my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, kind of walk you through figuring out which aspects of digestion are not working correctly and steps you can take to improve those. And you can get the book on Amazon, but I'll have a link in the description below where you can get the whole thing totally for free, and that'll walk you through those steps. And just keep in mind that if your doctor's telling you to take a PPI or something and turn off stomach acid, I'm not telling you not to do that. Remember, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving anybody medical advice. I'm basically a professional stand-up comic turned nutrition author, because when I lost my voice for 8 years and 23 different doctors couldn't figure that out, I had to dig for my own answers. So now, for 20 years, I've been teaching health professionals in more than 40 countries how to help their clients fix the actual underlying causes of problems instead of just covering up the symptoms. So when we're looking at snacking and we're looking at this timing, remember, snacking is not a great idea when we're trying to get that MMC working correctly. But some people are going to be dealing with hypoglycemic type issues where they're having sugar crashes. So they have to fix that, or they're going to need those snacks throughout the day just to function as a human. So we need to understand that just because something is beneficial doesn't mean that it's beneficial for us. A person might need to make some corrections to their physiology, maybe lift their mineral levels so when blood sugar crashes, the whole body doesn't shut down so much, or change their physiology so they're not reacting so hard to carbohydrates. We talk about that in a lot of videos about hypoglycemia, but that's a factor that can restrict a person from taking the step that really is optimal when it comes to SIBO. Because if you're doing something that's causing blood sugar or minerals and everything to go too low and activating all those stress hormones, you're also pushing the body into the sympathetic fight or flight state, and in that state, the body can't really make stomach acid correctly. So if you're stressing out the body, you need to take steps to correct that so we can fix this digestive process. Another important diet approach is to use real food. If you're eating processed junk and all this carbohydrate processed garbage, you're going to have a hard time getting rid of this problem. People also like to use probiotics or fermented foods a lot, and I feel that these are very beneficial. But if a person starts off with this and they have this overgrowth there, then they're putting all these good guys in, and they're going to battle all the bad guys and really magnify all their symptoms. So we like to see people take the steps that we talk about, using antimicrobial supplements and such to bring down the overgrowth a little bit, fix these digestive malfunctions so we're closing the door and allowing the MMC to work correctly, and then taking these steps can be really beneficial. And that kind of makes us think about, well, we might want to remove anything with prebiotics initially because that's going to magnify symptoms when it's creating more fermentation. But once we're using probiotics or fermented foods, then using some prebiotics could be a more beneficial step. And I get a lot of questions about what about garlic, because there's lots of studies that show that garlic can be beneficial as an antimicrobial and reduce these SIBO issues, but it's also a higher FODMAP food, and it's going to have these fermentable prebiotic fibers that are going to feed these bad guys and may create more fermentation. And we also want to think about, well, if I'm using garlic or some antimicrobial and I feel worse, that could be more of a die-off situation. When we're killing off these bacteria, the symptoms that they create can really magnify. So that doesn't mean something's not right for us. We just have to understand this could be part of them dying off, and I might have to just push through this symptom increase a little bit until things improve. So in my opinion, if there's not a situation over here that's going to restrict me from doing the things that are optimal, I like to use a low FODMAP diet on the lower carb side. Maybe some kind of carnivore meals-ish, but I like to keep some carbs in there so that I'm not pushing a person into ketosis and maybe creating trouble if they have a yeast fungal issue that they don't really know about. And I also like to really use real food and remove any type of snacking, so I'm magnifying that MMC process, since I'm usually going to be taking steps to thin out the bile so it's flowing correctly and synthesize that HCl production with capsules if I need to, until the body can start making its own HCl. So some people might need to adjust that for them if their mineral levels are low or they can't process proteins or fats correctly. They might need a little bit more carbs, but that's the basic thing that I view as an optimal way to go. And then once those symptoms have decreased enough and I feel like I can pull off the antimicrobials, then I really like to go with probiotics and fermented foods for at least like 3 months, just to kind of replenish that good gut flora. So I hope that helps you understand some of the approaches that seem to work a little bit better, but why they might not work for everybody, and steps you can take to adjust the situation a little bit according to what's going on with you. Right now, if you want to understand those steps to kind of reduce that overgrowth a little bit, you can jump over and check out our video on how to improve SIBO fast. I can't wait to hear about your results.